So I will turn this portion of the program over to our speakers that are listed in your program. And I'll be asking alums to introduce themselves, just give a quick introduction with your name and your graduation year and a sentence about what you're doing now. Um, and we'll keep it moving that way. But I would like to myself introduce Adam Harrison Levy and Karrie Jacobs, if you both would like to come up to the table. So Adam teaches Research and Writing 1 during the fall semester and is a director and producer whose specialty is the art of the interview. Karrie is a writer and critic who has taught contemporary issues in design, architecture, and urban planning every fall since the program began. And it gets students out of the classroom and into the field, and some days, like today, into the rain. So our intrepid design researchers. Adam is going to lead a conversation now with Karrie about her career and coursework and show off his interviewing skills as he does. So, all right, Adam, take it away.
And part of the whole process, when it goes well, is to have the opportunity, if you can, to talk to your interviewee before you actually sit down and do the interview, which are usually face-to-face. Or sometimes they're over Skype, or sometimes by email, though we encourage face-to-face emails. Face-to-face conversations. I don't know, face-to-face emails. That might be an interesting hybrid. So yesterday I called Karrie up, and we had a chat, and I have to be honest, we're all practitioners as well as teachers, and I really didn't know the ins and outs of Karrie's career. And at one point I asked her, after she sort of discussed what she had done, and I said, well, Karrie, how do you define yourself? And what was your answer?
I don't remember what my answer was.
It was a long, she didn't have an answer. And in some ways, I think that's kind of not typical of the course, but it's reflective of you'll see, of the eclecticism and the range of what a lot of us do, including the graduating students who go out into the world.
Although I did think of what my current description is.
What is that?
An observer of the man-made environment. Although I've been yelled at for using the phrase, the word man-made. So the human-created environment.
Wow. So you've been thinking about this in the last 24 hours.
Well, of course I remembered, once we got off the phone.
Okay. What I was going to say is that, in a way, the course is kind of like that. I mean, just to kind of follow up on what Molly was saying. It's a little bit of in that there's design history, there's journalism, there's architectural history, and all those things are very eclectic, and they could see, to be honest, a little disparate. But what's great about this course, and I think hopefully we'll communicate this, and it's really at the core of what Karrie does, is deep research, writing, and sort of at the core, I think that's what this MA is about. So I just wanted to kind of frame that and kind of put that front and center, because there is a sort of, that's really at the center of what we do. And it's also the center of what you do. And I'm very intrigued, just to bring it right up to date, of what you did today with the students.
Actually, it goes back to last week. We have 2 weeks of mega projects. And mega projects are enormous construction and development projects in New York City. So the class was broken up into teams, and each team went and assessed a particular project, like Hudson Yards, the Domino Project in Williamsburg, the Manhattanville campus of Columbia University, and Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island. And so they went out and they looked at those places and they researched them, and they came back and presented to the class what the good aspects and the bad aspects were. The technical term was they were doing good cop, bad cop. Then today we went to Dumbo and visited Two Trees, which is the developer of the Domino Project, because I thought it would be interesting for the teams to hear about the project from the developer and find out what it looks like and feels like from the inside. So that's what we did today. And then we walked around in the rain, and we went to a hotel lobby of the One Brooklyn Bridge Park Hotel, which we went to with the architect several weeks ago, but he rushed us through the lobby so fast that we didn't get a chance to really look at it. So we went back there and had coffee and talked about the apocalyptic nature of real estate investment, and got really depressed, and then we came here.
A typical day.
It was very edifying.
So what? So what? Well, let's describe, if you could, how this all started. And I think it started with, I mean, I'm glad the mic is in your hand, with rock and roll.
Oh, you mean my career?
Your career.
Yeah, I graduated from college at a hippie college in Olympia, Washington, and I moved to Seattle, and all of a sudden I got involved in a rock and roll magazine that was starting up, and became an editor at a rock and roll magazine. And sometimes what I wrote was about rock and roll, but I found that I was really, rock stars are not necessarily the most interesting people. I hate to tell you this if you haven't figured this out already. And so I started finding other things to write about. And I've always been interested in just sort of figuring out what the mechanics of the world is, and why things are the way they are. And so I started looking at things like, the article that comes to mind is trying to figure out why Pac-Man, which was a thing at the time, looked the way it did. And some of the Nintendo people were actually based outside of Seattle, so I had people to talk to even though they actually didn't know anything. And I got very interested in just what I thought of as the underpinnings of popular culture, or the infrastructure of popular culture. I didn't think of it as design, but that's how this started.
And do you think that is linked to sort of the origins of what could be called design history?
Well, I certainly didn't think that's what I was doing. I was just in a position to write about whatever interested me, because I was one of the editors of this publication, so I could, damn well follow whatever little threads I thought were worth following. And subsequently I got hired to edit the music section at New Times in Phoenix, Arizona. And my deal was I would edit the music section, but I could write whatever I wanted. And Phoenix was, after being in Seattle, Phoenix was the most bizarre place on earth. And so I started writing articles just to explain to myself why this place existed and what I was doing here. And those articles turned out to be later design articles. But again, I wasn't thinking of it that way. It was just like, why does this place look the way it does? And why do I react to it the way it, I sort of wrote a taxonomy of happy hours, that kind of thing.
That's wonderful.
So I think it's just, all been driven by curiosity. And then at a certain point, I moved to New York and abandoned having anything to do with writing about music or editing music publications and started writing about advertising. And then eventually, an opening appeared, a staff position at a magazine that a friend of mine was the designer of, and that magazine was Metropolis in its very early days. And I got hired because I had all these clips that were amazing design clips, even though I never thought that's what I was producing. And then once I was at Metropolis, all of a sudden I was a design writer, even though at that time there weren't really many people who were not professional designers writing about design. The only people who cared about design were designers. That's changed tremendously.
And then from there, you branched out into another sort of eclectic universe.
Well, the universe is eclectic. That's just a fact.
Right, okay.
But, well, what happened is I got to know Tibor Kalman, the graphic designer, and he was the art director for a while of Interview magazine. And Oliviero Toscani, who was the photographer who did all the sort of iconic Benetton ads for a really long time, decided that he wanted his own magazine. And he came to New York looking for someone to make the magazine for him. And he hired Tibor to be, I think his idea was that Tibor was going to be the art director, but Tibor's idea was that he was going to be the editor. But Tibor didn't really know much about how to edit a magazine, so he hired me. And so I did the startup of Colors, which was we're talking 1991. And the idea was that it was a magazine that was going to be about culture, big culture and little culture and all over the world. And we kind of had to invent a way to do that magazine, which involved having sort of very low-paid correspondents all over the world who we built into a network using FedEx and fax because email didn't exist. The World Wide Web hadn't been invented, or if it had been invented, no one knew about it. And we sort of built this network out of what existed to try and as I was telling Adam yesterday, some of the stories were about, how do you cure the hiccups in 20 countries, or, what kind of snack food do you like? But then there were other issues like race, like war, like, very big ticket issues that we tried to take on in ways that were both appropriate and wildly inappropriate. So.
And what did you learn from that as an editor?
That you probably can't do an issue about race without getting into a lot of trouble, both externally and internally. We fought the whole time about, I don't want to go into this, but we would fight about every single photograph and almost every single word in that, and every single punctuation mark in that particular issue, because the subject was so loaded. And I don't know, but the idea was that we were talking about fairly weighty issues sometimes, but visually. And so it was about translating complex ideas. I mean, there were words, and they were translated into 5 languages painstakingly. But it was about telling complex stories in fairly graphic and perhaps, not simplistic, but maybe simplified ways. So it was, I guess I learned a lot, both about the world and about storytelling.
And that's fascinating. Could you define that a little bit more? About the storytelling aspect. As a writer, I mean, how did that influence the way that you think about story or develop story?
Well, there's a funny thing, because there was, again, every issue was in 2 languages, English and one of the, I forget if it was, Spanish, Italian, German, Japanese, I think. In any case, the fact that there was a translation in every issue, and the fact that the emphasis was on the visual more than the written, meant that the space for written content was always fairly small. So, and I wound up writing more of every magazine than I would have liked to. And you had to be fairly concise and fairly clear, because you were always writing not just for the reader but also for the translator. And so it's funny, because I'm on Twitter a lot these days, and on Twitter also you have to think about saying what you want to say in a concise way, and you're always going back and crossing out words, and it was like that. It was like pre-Twitter is what it was.
I asked that because I think that's a challenge that we all face as writers now, is how to pack the most into much more reduced word counts, basically. And I think as faculty members, we're doing that more and more. And I think it's challenging. Like the essays that you guys have had to do this year, I mean, they're 500 words, a profile in 500 words. A profile in 1,000 seems generous and like a long stretch. I know some of our alums, who hopefully you'll speak to, are in that world right now. How do you tell a complicated story? I mean, maybe perhaps race is much more complicated, but in a concise but not a dumbed down way. And I think that's something that we're all wrestling with, and hopefully those are sort of some of the skills hopefully we're implanting at the moment. Do you feel that you're using that experience in your practice now?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if I'm I'm sure there is some vestigial colors always.
Right. Okay.
But I've done so many other things since that.
Well, let's talk about some of the other things, because Dwell is fascinating, and how Dwell came to be, and the fact that it was a sort of really smart hybrid of different genres.
Yeah, well, Dwell was a magazine that I got headhunted for. I was writing for New York Magazine in the second half of the 90s, writing an architecture column for them at a time that nobody was building anything in New York City, so that was interesting. And all of a sudden there was this magazine in San Francisco that some person was starting, and they were considering me for editor. And they had the idea that it was going to be, you know, a magazine about houses, a shelter book is the term, but it was going to be about modern and experimental housing. It wasn't going to be boring and conservative. And so to apply for editor, I think there were 2 finalists, and we had to sort of critique what their consultants had come up with. Their consultants had sort of come up with a package of what this magazine should be. And the package just looked like, you know, an issue of Metropolitan Home to me, or something even more mainstream. It was like he said, she said, and just sort of all this stuff that was. So I sort of wrote this, you know, treatise on these, you know, saying, okay, well, architecture magazines are edited for men, and shelter books are edited for women, and the ideal shelter magazine should really be for both, and it should be, you know, I just sort of had this whole, sort of an allergic reaction to what they were proposing, and so I wrote a very, very critical, you know, response to it, which, as sometimes happens, got me the job, which I didn't want.
There's
exactly.
a tip.
And then I had to sort of invent this magazine, and I had, you know, theories like that you should shoot a house as if people lived in it, which turned out to be very difficult to do. You know, I had this memo that I sent out to all the people whose houses we were shooting, which was, okay, you can clean up, but clean as if your best friend is coming over, not like your mother-in-law is coming over. And after a while, photographers who worked with us kind of began to understand what we wanted and undermined us in a way, because they would say, oh, we'll put this can of Campbell's soup on the counter, or we'll put, you know, this pan of dog food out, and it will make the editors happy. And of course it did, but it was sort of a fraud. But
There's something else which I think also links to sort of, not to sound too grand, but like the aesthetics of our course, which is you couldn't do what Metropolitan Home was doing. But I love the fact you described how you did other sorts of stories.
well, the thing that happened early in the life of Dwell, this was the startup period. It was like 1999. We launched in 2000, and when we talked to people about the magazine, editors from other, you know, shelter books, from At Home and Architectural Digest, and they would say things like, well, you know that all the best houses are taken. Nobody's going to let you shoot their house because we have dibs on it. And I realized that what they meant was the best houses maybe in New York City and the Hamptons and in the LA area. But if we went to other cities that are not customarily covered by magazines in New York or LA, if we went to the St. Louis's and the, you know, Oklahoma cities and Tacoma and looked for people doing innovative things there, that they would surely be very happy to let us shoot whatever they were doing. And it turned out that there were people all over the country doing incredibly cool things in places that no one had ever thought to look for coolness before. And so there was this sort of resource that we discovered, or we felt like we discovered, and that we began giving, sustenance to. And I think that we probably changed the attitude of some people, at least, to the cities they lived in, and encouraged architectural innovation in places where it hadn't been much encouraged before. So it was a great adventure in sometimes visiting those cities and meeting those people. That was probably my favorite part of doing that magazine.
And I know you're sort of epicenter here of burrowing through the city and finding the unknown stories. And I think that's something, again, that the course likes to do. I mean, there are a lot of us in different genres, and I should say, as Molly was saying, you know, there's podcasting, there's essay writing, there's narrative nonfiction. But something that does unite a lot of the course is finding those unknown, overlooked stories, which I think is really a kind of skill and a gift.
I like sending students out into the streets, or sometimes to Jack's 99-cent store.
Right.
In Search of Beauty, by the way.
Yeah.
Just to see what they bring back.
Well, can you describe that assignment? Because I thought, wow, that sounds great.
Well, we talk about beauty, and we read a couple of essays on the subject, fairly contemporary essays, and I send the students to two different kinds of places with the assignment that they have to find an object that they think is beautiful, and they have to come back and make a case, with luck based on the readings, for the beauty of this object. And so Muji is one of the places, and Muji, of course, has a very well-defined, homogeneous aesthetic. And then the other place, I've used different places. I've used Bed Bath & Beyond, I've used Pearl River, and in recent years I've been using Jack's 99-cent store on 32nd Street because they just seem like the least likely place to find beauty. My favorite example is someone a couple of years ago came back from Jack's 99-cent store with a roll of duct tape and made an incredible case for the beauty of this roll of duct tape. And all of a sudden it was silver and glittery and magical, not just a roll of duct tape. And it makes me very happy when those things happen.
So that's design from the SVA point of view. The beauty of duct tape.
Okay, duct
Thank
tape.
you.
All right.
Okay.